What's going on, people? My name is Batman, and today I wanted to talk about the Federal Trade Commission's investigation into Machinima's marketing tactics for the Xbox One. So this was in the news a long time ago when they first launched the investigation, but it's been getting some renewed attention lately because the results of that investigation have now been finalized and made public, and the FTC essentially concluded that Machinima's marketing was deceptive. But because Machinima was taking advantage of this sort of loophole-friendly gray area that is YouTube, they got off with only a slap on the wrist. So as a quick recap, about 2 years ago when the Xbox One was first launching, Machinima paid two YouTubers, the Syndicate Project and Skyverse Gaming, $30,000 and $15,000 respectively, to make videos, basically saying they liked the Xbox One. The YouTubers were given specific instructions on how to make the videos. They weren't allowed to say anything negative about the Xbox One and were required to claim that they were excited about specific Xbox One features. Now, not only was this information not disclosed to the public or their audiences, these YouTubers were in fact required to sign non-disclosure agreements. They weren't allowed to even talk about this deal in any capacity to anyone. And it's worth mentioning that the FTC has cleared Microsoft of any wrongdoing. They were unaware of Machinima's specific promotional tactics, and when they did find out about them, they made a point of asking to cut it out. But the FTC has investigated and has since ruled that this was a deceptive practice. In general, the law says that companies aren't allowed to pay money for favorable reviews from seemingly independent third-party sources. If they do dish out cash to said independent third-party source, it becomes a first-party promotional partner. So like if a news anchor like Bill O'Reilly or what have you is paid $1 million by Volkswagen for promotional purposes, he would be required to disclose that before saying nice things about Volkswagen on his show, otherwise he would be fined. Now, what's interesting is that fines have not been dished out in this case to either major YouTuber involved or Machinima. According to FTC spokesman Jay Mayfield, the FTC is, and I quote, not able under its mandate to seek civil fines without an order in place. What this means is that in the past there haven't been any clear legal guidelines regarding YouTubers, right? So basically the parties involved can claim ignorance. These deceptive practices were not specifically prohibited because YouTube has not received any real legal scrutiny until now. Machinima took advantage of a loophole. This is textbook deceptive marketing. Paying someone to say nice things about your product without disclosing that you had paid them is the most standard and basic definition of a deceptive tactic. It's been against the law for a long time, and it is so obviously not in the spirit of our trade laws. And I imagine Machinima was aware of that from the beginning, but they took advantage of how little scrutiny YouTube is receiving, and the fact that if they did get caught, they have this sort of safety net, right? Where they can just say, well, nobody told us we couldn't. We didn't know that what we were doing was wrong. And what's troubling about this to me is that this could have been going on with any number of products for a very long time. For the first years that I was really getting into watching YouTube, back during like MW2 and Black Ops 1, when gaming channels were exploding left and right, Machinima was the YouTube gaming network. I think a lot of people I didn't even realize that other YouTube networks even existed. It was partnered with every major gaming channel, and like 90% of the gaming videos you saw started off with its little intro, right? This most recent investigation was limited in scope. Government agencies only have so many resources and so much time. This is relatively small stuff compared to the big, multi-million or billion-dollar deals that the FTC is having to keep tabs on regularly. It doesn't seem like they did much investigating into the past to see if this was the only time a deal like this was struck, and really there would be no reason for them to do that anyways, because they wouldn't even be able to find them further, right? This new order they're proposing is just their way of saying, hey, we know now what you're up to, cut it out. But how do we know that this deal or something similar to this deal hasn't happened before? Machinima had the parties involved sign very strict non-disclosure agreements. They could have been taking advantage of this loophole for years, with other past games, past consoles, past tech products. Anyone advertising with Machinima, we could have seen deals like this in the past. And not just Machinima, but any network or company could have been striking similar deals for the same reason Machinima was able to. There's no clear legal order in place prohibiting it. And I wouldn't make such a big deal about this if it wasn't for the fact that we have had so many huge disappointments in this industry lately. Sometimes it's broken-ass games like Halo MCC or Battlefield 4. And you'll recall, actually, Battlefield 4 was in deep shit for something very similar to this during its launch when EA paid YouTubers to say nice stuff about that game on YouTube. And that was not properly disclosed, and that was so obviously wrong because you had these YouTubers saying really nice stuff about a game that was so hopelessly broken upon its launch, and that was a big controversy at the time. Or other times with games like Destiny or Call of Duty Ghosts, there are huge discrepancies between people's expectations and the final product's actual quality. you know, when we look at something like Destiny's story, I really feel like so many customers were blindsided by the fact that it had such a mediocre, if non-existent story when it launched, because it had such an emphasis on the story and the narrative, the law of the jungle, you know, when they were advertising it. There are these huge discrepancies between people's expectations and the final product's actual quality, and I really think part of that has to do with how much free, positive coverage these games get long before they release from YouTube personalities. Another part of the problem, I suspect, is just that many of the consumers involved are children. Generally are going to be easier to deceive. They're going to be more trusting and less aware of what proper disclosure even is. Now, you'll recall I've made a stink about this shit before. This is what I got in the tiff with Drifter about, and something he said in his reply to me that I thought really stuck out was when he mentioned that YouTube is the wild, wild west right now, right? There's not a lot of scrutiny. A lot of stuff isn't specifically defined in legal terms yet, and this is a problem because YouTube is rapidly becoming a major media platform for not just gaming, but many products. I believe that today's gaming enthusiasts should be actively trying to settle the wild, wild west. We need to define what's right and wrong, and part of the problem is the world is being run by adults who don't understand gaming or YouTube, right? You hear about this with like revenge porn or death threats on the internet, where someone fearing for their life calls the cops and the cops are like, what exactly is Twitter again? Right? So there's a disconnect there. You guys are the future. You know, shit like this on YouTube will probably remain a sort of gray area with little to no scrutiny until younger generations assume more positions of power and responsibility. With that in mind, I think it's important everyone starts thinking about this shit kind of early on. So there are some gray areas of YouTube that the online gaming community needs to scrutinize further. Some of these are what allowed Machinima to get away with their shenanigans. Some of these are areas for potential abuse in the future. The bitter truth is that disclosure laws in the US in general, not just on YouTube, but in general, aren't as strong as they should be. We live in a world where motherfuckers can, you know, donate tens of millions of dollars to a presidential candidate and we can't know who those people are. A world where businesses can own entire newspapers or websites and can direct the coverage of said news outlets and rarely have that fact disclosed even when an article is, you know, for instance, attacking a competitor or contributing to some other strategic goal of whatever company in whatever way that may or may not be simply coincidental. The world outside of the internet, business, journalism, and the legal requirements surrounding each evolved with severe moral and practical deficiencies, particularly when it comes to the best interests of the consumer. The consumer usually gets the short end of the stick. It is imperative that we do not let the internet evolve in the same unjust manner, and YouTube is the frontier of that fight. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of these potential areas for abuse. A prominent gray area in my eyes is when should YouTube channels be required to disclose something. I suspect that part of what makes YouTube such a gray area is that it can be difficult to distinguish between what counts as entertainment and what counts as news or opinionated reviews. Most gaming channels, and especially the two involved in this particular scheme, are predominantly entertainers, right? But then every now and then an opinion or a review video goes up as well. That's the thing that's unique about YouTube. Most other entities are clearly established as either sources of information or entertainment. Bill O'Reilly doesn't just one day start doing a comedy show. Modern Family doesn't one day just start covering politics in a news format, right? Entertainers are allowed to do product placement. They are allowed to strike deals with companies to promote their products in their shows. For instance, Modern Family had an episode come out around the time of Xbox One's release where Phil Dunphy was playing Halo, and the character literally says something like, "What's the best game for shooting aliens of all time? Halo!" You know, they had an entire episode take place on an iPad, right? When shows do that stuff, it's usually because they've struck a deal with Microsoft or Apple or whoever to promote their products on the show. But they don't have to specifically mention that deal during the course of the show. However, if Bill O'Reilly did a 10-minute segment talking about how much he likes the Xbox One because Sony ponies are pinheads, he would be required to clearly disclose his business relationship beforehand. In fact, most journalists are required to disclose any kind of relationship they have to anything they're covering. Sometimes it'll be real trivial ass shit, like, oh hey, by the way, this guy and I worked in the same office for 2 years in the 90s, you know, small and inconsequential shit. So I suspect the problem with the YouTube channel is that it can be hard to define what they are. In one video they can be Bill O'Reilly giving their opinions and shit, and in the next video they can be Modern Family. You know, this single entity can sort of jump all over the place very quickly, right? Like, here's another thing I think might crop up in the future. What if a YouTuber says that they're in character? You know, El Presador, trolling videos, impersonation videos. What if somebody throws out a bunch of opinions but then argues that they were in character? And, you know, those are the opinions of the character and therefore it's just some form of product placement, or not even that, it's just part of the character's narrative, right? And when does a relationship between a business or a product and a YouTuber even necessitate disclosure? And this is the big one I've talked about in the past. So personally, I think the FTC should go farther than they have. You know, their proposed order requires full disclosure of any paid promotional activities, but I think YouTubers should be required to disclose clearly the nature of any kind of relationships to the product in the video itself, if they are going to give opinions on the quality of the game. For instance, if you get flown out to LA and put up in a hotel and it's paid for, and if you're given a free PS4, and if you're given behind the scenes early access to super valuable footage that indirectly enriches you, and then you go on to do a review of the game several months before it's even out, I think you should be required to fully disclose that, not in the description of the video, but in the video itself. And I'm not referencing any single YouTuber here. I can think of at least 5 major channels this would apply to. The bigger problem is we have a huge loophole where companies can pay YouTubers or any major media outlet with access. So it's not technically a deal, but it kinda is. You know, the most popular channels or media platforms will be those who have the most exclusive behind the scenes early footage access type stuff. And companies with popular products, whether it's game consoles or a AAA shooter, are able to use that access as an indirect monetary bribe and or threat to anyone looking to cover their products. Access equals money, but to get access you need to be in the good graces of the company or studio producing whatever product you're covering. And how do you stay in their good graces? With positive coverage. And at what point does that coverage turn into deceptive marketing? It's not as direct as Machinima straight up paying YouTubers, but indirectly it's the same concept. And that's ultimately what I think leads to such widespread disappointment in so many major titles. Companies are using YouTube to very effectively and cheaply spin a narrative, and that is a bigger problem than this whole Xbox One controversy, and something that I hope the FTC and more YouTubers start scrutinizing more closely. And what about these channels that are built exclusively around a single game? This is what's kind of unprecedented about YouTube as well. You know, in the past, we've never seen a newspaper or a television show that was dedicated exclusively to one product, right? That just talked about that one product all the time, every day for years. You know, Call of Duty, Destiny, Minecraft. Even if they don't have any kind of relationship with the game's publisher or developer, considering that the sole existence of some of these channels revolves exclusively around the product's success, should that simple truth be mentioned anytime they give quote-unquote reviews of the game? I mean, I guess you could compare it to like a sports show covering one sport, but even then you're going to have many separate business entities involved, in that each basketball team is its own business, right? Plus the NBA itself. So there's less incentive to cater to any individual business entity exclusively. With these YouTube channels that exist solely to cover one game, you have one product and one publisher to cater to. It's a relationship ripe for abuse, filled with opportunities for quid pro quo bullshit. For instance, what if a company pays a YouTuber, directly or indirectly with money or gifts, not to give opinions or recommendations, but to just make videos about the game? A Let's Play series, for instance, because every video is advertising for whatever product it is showcasing. Even if there's no specific opinions given, should motherfuckers be required to disclose in this instance? What if the YouTuber's putting on an over-exaggerated show of personal enjoyment and excitement during the Let's Play, which many LPers do just for the sake of entertainment? That gives a false portrait of how exciting the game really is. If they dedicate an entire Let's Play to a single game, doesn't that imply that they like the game? Isn't that a paid promotional activity? And lastly, how specific should the disclosure be, and where should it make its appearance? So, one of the key differences between Bill O'Reilly type shows with opinions and Modern Family type shows with product placement is that O'Reilly will have to mention his disclosure typically before he gives his opinion. With Modern Family, you'll usually find some mention of the deal buried in the end credits where nobody will ever really see it. I see some of these mega YouTubers disclosing certain stuff in the description of the video, but most people know that the description is only seen by a fraction of the people who see the actual video. And it's like, well, what if you put it towards the bottom of the description where people have to click the show more button to even see it? Does that count? I think the disclosure should have to be in the video itself, and further towards the beginning of the video, because we know that only like a third of the people will watch any given video on average all the way through. And as far as the specificity of the disclosure, like, should said YouTuber have to disclose the specific ways that they have benefited from the relationship? Or should they just have to mention that they have a relationship with the business behind whatever product they're covering? And I'm not saying that I know definitively the proper answer to all of these questions. I'm an armchair expert, without a doubt. But I think it's important that more people pay attention to stuff like this so that future generations of gamers don't get duped in the same way that I think a lot of us have with certain games and products. The For the Win query of the day is, what is a major gaming media outlet, whether it's a YouTuber or a website or whatever, that you don't trust, and why? This is Batman, signing out.